Welcome to the Kunk YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be seeing what a CPU launched in 2011 could do in 2021. That's right, I'm going to be putting a CPU that's a decade old up against some of my favorite games. The specific CPU I'm testing is an Intel Core i5-2500k. Can this old and very well respected Sandy Bridge CPU hold up 10 years later? I love computers, but I'm definitely not the most well-informed person out there, so I'm only going to be talking about things I understand or at least get the concept behind. But that's probably better for this video anyways, since I think everybody who understands everything about computers can probably figure out if this CPU is good and worth it in 2021. The i5-2500k is a fan favorite of the Sandy Bridge CPUs, trailing close behind the i7-2600k and the i7-2700k. I got my example of an i5-2500k for about $24 on eBay, and as of now they're going for about $30 to $40. I'm a budget gamer, so that means my PC is budget as well. My main CPU is the i5-2500k, and I haven't had anything better. The specs for this computer are, of course, the CPU, which is an i5-2500k. I have the CPU paired with an MSI branded Radeon RX 570 4GB graphics card. The GPU in the system is being bottlenecked by the CPU, but I got it because of future plans that I may reveal in a future video. As for the RAM in this system, I have 20GB of miscellaneous DDR3 Ram. All of the parts are compiled into an old workstation from some business that I'm unsure about. The tower is a Dell Precision T1600. This old Dell worked as a starting point for me, having an i3-2120 and an AMD FirePro V4900 graphics card. I got this system for about $40, which is not a bad price to pay considering I was able to play CSGO and Gmod at decent settings. I upgraded the PSU, then the GPU, and finally the CPU. The PSU is a 500 watt unit from Channelwell Technology rated at 80+ bronze. I'm using the stock motherboard that came with the T1600 and it is serving me well despite not being able to overclock the 2500k. I'm sure I could get a nice boost in performance if I get a new motherboard tailored to game on for this CPU, but that doesn't really suit a budget build. The 2500k isn't overclocked. On top of that, the RX 570 isn't overclocked either. I have some games saved to a solid state drive while others are on a hard drive, but that shouldn't affect performance too much, only the loading times. The games I am going to be testing are BeamNG.Drive, Grand Theft Auto 5, Fallout 4, Satisfactory, and finally Counter-Strike Global Offensive. For all of these games, I'm going to be testing on my main PC. This means all of my files, all of my other games, and all of my background processes are running and installed to the computer. This will simulate how it would be if any user has this CPU. Not all gaming computers are used to only play games. Most are used as workstations as well. I feel that this is a more realistic way of testing computer components. It may very well have been pointless to say this and do it, but I figured I would mention it. All of these games were tested in 1080p as 720p is becoming less used and not popular. People prefer to play at 1080p or higher anyways. I can't do any gaming at 1440p as I don't have a monitor that can do such a legendary resolution. I also feel that my graphics card may have had a heart attack doing that. I also feel the need to mention that I have 3 monitors, but I unplugged everything but my main monitor to avoid putting any unwanted strain on the computer. So with all that being said, let's get into the benchmarks. For the first benchmark, we have BeamNG.Drive. This is a soft body physics game that simulates vehicles crashing very well, but it does so at a cost. This game is a little difficult to run, especially if you have multiple vehicles spawned in. I have set this game to the highest possible graphics settings for 1080p. end of my test of driving around the map Utah, USA, I got an average FPS of 26. I also got a 1% low of 13 FPS and a 0.1% low of 3 FPS. This game actually runs surprisingly well at these settings. When I play this game in my free time, I usually have it set to the lowest settings, and I still barely get 60 FPS. At these settings, the game is using 100% GPU and 60 to 70% CPU. I believe MSI Afterburner is only recording how much CPU the game is taking up and not anything in the background. Checking the Windows game bar or even Task Manager shows the CPU is pegged at 100% usage, so much so that it took a while for Task Manager to even open. Next up, we have GTA 5 running at the highest possible settings at 1080p. Now, as for GTA, we got an average of 33 FPS and a 1% low of 1 FPS. As for the 1% low, it's probably somewhere within the 2 seconds per frame range. The next game is one of my favorites, Fallout 4. I haven't played this game in a while, and I don't really have hope for it playing 1080p high on this setup, as I was playing the game low to medium settings before to get 60 FPS. Fallout 4 was another game that stunned me with how well it played. The game had an average FPS of 45, the 1% low was 11, and the 0.1% low was 6. The game seems to have been running well when inside, but when I'm in an open world environment, the FPS tanks. I feel if I'd ran the game longer, the FPS average would be much lower. For the next game, I'm very worried about my computer. Satisfactory is a game that I run as low as possible graphics-wise, but I still get an average FPS of about 30. If I run it higher, it may run better, but I doubt it. The average for Satisfactory was 42 FPS, the 1% low was 5 FPS, and the 0.1% was 2 FPS. This game runs a little better, but I'm sure if I got a factory with a bunch of conveyors and machines and everything going, it would definitely slow down. So no FPS gain depending on graphics settings. CSGO at the highest settings averaged about 30 FPS. I couldn't get MSI Afterburner to record the FPS, so there's no 1% or 0.1% lows. It ran lower than expected, but at medium, the game has no problems playing at over 100 FPS. After all of my testing, I'm honestly surprised with all the results. All of the games that I thought would bring my computer to its knees ran surprisingly well. The only game I expected to do extremely well was CSGO, and it ran about the same as all the other games. For all of these tests, I did 1080p highest settings, but if you put all the games to normal or medium, they run perfectly fine. To answer the earlier question, maybe. The i5-2500k is still a good CPU in 2021, but you shouldn't build a computer with it. Build something with a much newer i5 or i7. The setup is good, but for a few $100 more, you can get a computer that can run AAA titles with no issue. That's gonna be all for this video. If you guys want any other games tested, leave a comment. If you enjoyed the content, then leave a like. This is my first video that has taken multiple days to put together, and I definitely plan on doing more videos like this in the future. So if you like the content you see, go ahead and subscribe to the Kunk YouTube channel.